There he is. Welcome to episode 71 of Stick to Hockey Live. Jason Martinez back from the beach. Post-draft development camp going on, and there he is. Montreal. Suns out, guns out. Anthony DeMarco. What's up, brother?
Very, very hot. Very, very hot. So I apologize for the attire today, but this is actually my last podcast hit. And regular scheduled podcast hit. Probably going to take some time off after development camp. I think we all need it, yourself included.
Yeah, no doubt. Things will slow down. It's one thing, Ant, that hockey does really well. Shut down after free agency and all the whirlwind that comes with it. And as you guys call it up there in the Great White North, the cottage season. But everybody shuts it down pretty good. They unplug pretty well. I'm pretty impressed by it.
Yeah, I mean, once you get into mid-July, there's nothing that much to talk about. Like in the world of the Flyers, I'm sure we'll get some RFA signings soon. We got one in Ronnie Attard today. Cam York, Noah Cates, Morgan Frost, obviously the big three that are expected to be signed sometime between now and the end of this and the end of the offseason. But I mean, aside from that, I don't know if we're going to see anything major on the Flyers front. Like, I think the only outside chance would maybe be Carter Hart, but nothing's moving on that front until the Hockey Canada stuff is regulated and finds itself a resolution. But I think for the major part, the Flyers are pretty much done for the summer.
Let me ask you about that. When is, you said resolution with the Hockey Canada stuff. When is resolution, by the way?
I mean, I had heard shortly after the Cup final, then I believe it was Frank Saravalli who said it could expect it to happen kind of in the dead of summer when no one's paying attention, which I mean would be very NHL-esque if they just dropped that news like last week of July or first week of August. But it feels like, I believe Bill Daly has even said that they've concluded their investigation, and obviously they have to work in concert with the London police. So, I mean, I would expect sometime before mid-August, but I mean, we all know that the NHL tries to catch everybody off guard, especially with these controversial type of situations.
Well, they have to almost come out in a particular order, don't they? What comes out first, the Hockey Canada investigation, the police investigation, or the NHL investigation?
Well, I mean, I would imagine the police investigation is the one who's kind of controlling all of this because you're dealing with the law. And then Hockey Canada would probably, I would imagine Hockey Canada is third because they've already kind of brought the hammer down in some capacity. Like the entire organization has been overhauled. The leadership of Hockey Canada has been overhauled. So I would imagine it's the London Police Force, then the NHL, and then Hockey Canada. But I mean, it's anyone's guess at this point. I just think that you will get some kind of a resolution before the start of the season, because I think the NHL has concluded their investigation, and I imagine they're just waiting on the London Police Force.
Yeah, I think you're right. And eventually we can get all that kind of omnipresent and move forward and with the results and go from there. And we haven't talked since the draft. I was down at the shore, and we haven't done an episode in a couple of weeks here. And I know you wrote a piece on the fourthperiod.com, great stuff there about the Flyers being committed to the rebuild. Let's kind of start with the draft. And Matvei Michkov is the guy they get in the draft, and Dan Silver has put out a lot of great people on Twitter putting out great info on Michkov. I don't have time to compile all this stuff and find it and all that stuff, but these guys do a great job. And at D Silver 88 put this out. He put, here's how Matvei Michkov's 18-year-old KH season compares to some other Russian stars. Ovechkin played 53 games, 13 and 11, 0.45 points per game. Malkin in 34 games, 0.35 points per game. Kaprizov, 0.26 in 31 games. Kucherov only played 9, but 0.22. And Panarin only played 5 and 0.20. And Michkov in 30 games, 9 goals, 11 assists, 0.67 average points per game for the young Russian. What do you think of the pick? And are you surprised that everything kind of unfolded the way it did with getting Michkov to the Flyers training center under the cover of darkness, actually in the middle of the day playing air hockey?
I think it was a good pick. I think when you've been preaching high-end talent or lack thereof for 18 months, if you had a chance to take high-end talent, you had to do so, even if that comes with an inherent risk like it does with Matvei Michkov. And good on the Flyers, right, for really doing their due diligence and trying to wow this kid and trying to really make sure that if they pick this kid, it will not be for nothing. And I think that what they did by bringing him into Voorhees the week before, and then meeting him once again in Nashville was indicative of how serious they were about taking Matvei Michkov. And the fact that they aren't expecting him to be here for at least 1 year, probably 2 years, possibly 3 years, is indicative that they are willing to see this thing out through the long term if it takes that. And I do think it's fair to say, and I think Danny Briere has been very transparent about this through his media availabilities, is that they have no set timeline, right? Like they haven't put a hard timeline or a time constraint on when they want to be competitive. It's going to be a lot based on how these kids develop, and a lot of that will have to do with as my cat tries to get in, but a lot will have to do on the player development staff that they just overhauled, now headed by Armstrong and Schultz. But I really think that the Michkov pick is a dawn of a new era in a way, and not just trying to go for the short-term fix.
I know it kind of freaks people out a little bit, the 3 years. He's got the 3-year KHL contract. But most players, even first rounders, like Tyson Forster was drafted in 2020. And it's been, 3 years? Not a regular NHL yet. That's actually normal kind of time frame for guys to get to the NHL, to go through, whether they go back to junior or overseas or college or whatever. But Michkov, the thing about it is they develop players well in the KHL. They come over ready. It's a good league. They play against men, really good. It's a different game. But the other thing is if he does say take 3 years, the good news about that is that he's just signing his ELC 3 years from now, and you're getting a more finished product in 3 years on an ELC deal.
There are a lot of advantages for him not coming over right away, because let's be honest, let's say Matvei Michkov was going to play in the NHL this season. Are the Flyers a cup contender? No.
Nope.
Are they a playoff team? Maybe, but all in all, they would be best served to have another year where maybe not bottom out. I know that Danny Briere said they don't believe in tanking, which I think most teams don't. But I don't think that there would be a major advantage to having Matvei Michkov here immediately. Now, after that, I think the Flyers could be a competitive playoff team as early as 24-25, depending on how things break their way. I mean, what happens with the development of Morgan Frost, Tyson Forster, Cam York, and Emil Andre? Like, they still have a lot of good players already playing on their team or professionally with the Phantoms, including goaltenders and Urson. What ends up happening with Fedotov? Does he come over? Does he not? And I think that Michkov, maybe beyond next season, would be of benefit to the Flyers to be here. But in the immediate future, they don't need him here right now. And to be honest, they could use another season of trying to figure out what they have with some of their guys who are already here, like a Tippett, like a Farabee, like a Wade Allison, a major season coming up for Wade Allison. So I do think there are a lot of advantages, plus the contractual ones, like you just alluded to having him only come over in, let's say, 1 to 3 years time.
Yeah. And, there's going to be a lot of semantics and posturing amongst the KHL and the NHL here. But, the agreement, if he's under contract there, he can't come play here. He'd have to be let out or bought out. So we'll see where that goes. I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic to follow. Bonk's another guy they get in the first round, 22nd. Gabe Perreault was sitting there, and, a team that's looking for offense, playing on a great line with Will Smith and, put up a ton of points. Are you surprised they didn't take Perreault? Would you go on Perreault or over Bonk, the London Knight?
I'm so not a prospect guy. I heard the whole best player available thing, but I had heard that they were looking at Bonk leading up to the draft. And I think that they had always kind of thought in their head that they wanted a defenseman, preferably a right shot, with that second pick. And because at that time, they didn't know that they were going to have a second round pick. They eventually get back into the second round by trading, I believe it was, a second next year and a fourth this year or something like that. But you could say that it was a pick for need. I understand that. But obviously, you get a guy like Bonk who projects to be, if I'm not mistaken, a second pair defenseman, a bigger guy. And we've heard Keith Jones talk about it a lot, that he wants to rebuild that blue line. He wants to restructure that blue line. And they had a guy at the ready as a right shot defenseman who could kind of not fall into their lap particularly, but they had a chance to take him, and they did. And obviously Gabe Perreault more offensive upside. You can make the case that he was the best player available. I mean, it's tough for me to say because I know that when you have a gap because after 22nd, before they got back into the second round, what was their next pick? 74 or something?
Yeah, it was a while, ways off.
Yeah. So by the time that they got back to the podium, would there have been a defenseman worth taking? We heard Brent Flair say that there was good defenseman, but it was a shallow pool. So I understand why they did it, especially given the fact that Bonk is a right shot and on the bigger side. But you could also make the argument that you have to take best player available all the time.
Yeah, and Perot's a guy that put up a ton of points. Bonk is in development. I had a chance to see him a little bit yesterday. Very smooth, but there's a rawness to that, especially bigger frame defenders. But the one thing that London does really well is develop NHL guys. They run that thing like that program like it's an NHL team. The Hunters are hard on them, but they develop them and they get them ready. So we'll see how that goes. Free agency was interesting because, Torts talked about it all year. What's the next steps of this thing? We're rebuilding. He was kind of the first to kind of pin that on the board. And, the first thing he said was all about subtracting. I remember my Flyers Daily talking to Torts one time. He said, like 8 guys I don't see being here. That's a lot. I mean, on an NHL, it's almost half a game day roster. And the subtracting has happened with Kevin Hayes, Ivan Provorov. And, part of I always said, well, that's fine to subtract, but who's going to be on the roster when the games start? And you can't just have a team full of guys on entry-level contracts trying to prove themselves in the NHL, because if you're not ready for it, first of all, it's not good for your development. Number 2, if you're in the NHL and you're a skill player, you've got to get minutes. So you can't just put, a Tyson Forster on the fourth line. So they had to get into free agency. They get Poehling, they get Garnet Hathaway of note, Mark Stahl, and then today they signed Victor Mete. What did you think of the free agent signings? Let's start with Stahl because, he's 36. He's played over 1,100 games, played 82 this year for Florida, played 21 playoff games, been around a long time, but people are going, oh, here are the Flyers grabbing veterans again, and it's going to block kids.
Yeah, what it tells me is maybe they're not sure if Ronnie Attard is ready for the NHL. That's what it kind of tells me.
I haven't seen that he is yet.
You don't think so?
I don't think he's ready yet. I think he's getting close, but I think ideally they'd like to start him in Lehigh again. I think so.
And, I think that there is something to be said about not rushing kids. Like, you don't want to block kids, but you also don't want to rush them. And I don't think that a Mark Stahl signing or a Victor Mete signing, but we'll zero in more on Stahl because he has the one-way deal. I don't see how this blocks a kid in any way. He's a veteran guy, has played for Torts. He knows what he's all about. Danny Briere alluded to this in his media availability the other day. And I think he could play either side. And right now you have enough capable bodies that if Ronnie Attard is not ready to start the year in the NHL, you don't have to panic. You don't have to force feed an Adam Ginning or a Helgi Grans or an Emil Andre. If they're not ready, you have enough guys to fill out, easy enough for me to say, a full roster of capable NHL bodies. And then probably even have a guy sitting on the bench. And I mean, if let's say somewhere through the season, an Emil Andre or Ronnie Attard is able to come up and be that guy and step into an NHL role, I don't think anyone has a problem with sitting a Mark Stahl or sitting a Sean Walker or sitting a Nick Seeler. Like, at the end of the day, these are all guys who, like Torts say, just kind of backfill the youth that they've already kind of invested in, but maybe they aren't quite ripe enough yet. And you look at a lot of the guys who will be playing 100% on the back end. And those two guys will be Cam York and Igor Zamula, presumably. And I think Cam York is probably going to be your de facto number 1. I think you're going to see Zamula get a lot of the PK time that was previously held by Ivan Provorov. That's a big, massive void and a lot of PK minutes that are now available because Ivan Provorov was moved on from. But I don't see the harm in bringing in Mark Stahl. Based on conversations I've had, I'd be very, very surprised if he plays close to 82 games. I think he's going to be someone who comes in and out of the lineup. And I don't really see it being an overly bad thing because I really don't think, and I've been told that any of these moves impacts, blocking a kid in any form or fashion, because you could easily sit a Mark Stahl or a Seeler or a Walker if any of the aforementioned kids are ready.
Yeah, I think Danny really alluded to that without saying it bluntly in his press availability on Monday, where he said, we were very upfront with where we are with Mark Stahl. So that tells you that, hey, you may not play every game. I mean, he may be a guy too that you can sell off at the deadline for a 4th-round pick for a playoff run because he brings that veteran, and he's played 121 playoff games in his career, 1,100 regular season games. So he's a guy that may be an asset to somebody for some D depth that's going on a playoff run, if presumably the Flyers are not going to the playoffs. So yeah, I know people freak out about it, and there's different ways to rebuild, but the notion of tearing it all the way down, it was never possible here. It's not possible when you have Sean Couturier on that contract and hasn't played. You can't. The GM on the other side of a deal is not, Helen Keller. Like they're aware they're not going to just bail you out. So let's go to Sanheim, because we know his name was out there. I heard Freach talking about it. It may have rattled Sanheim a little bit. Now he's on a team that knows they were trying to shop him before his new deal kicks in. How does he handle this and kind of just control what he can control and have a bounce back year? And the other part of a bounce back year is he's got to be put in good situations. Is he all of a sudden going to be a top pair right side guy as a left shot with Cam York? And is that a good situation to bounce back?
Well, I think with Sanheim, I think there's absolutely validity to the notion that he maybe would have gotten rattled by it. I was talking to someone close to Sanheim, and I had heard that maybe Sanheim felt it was too awkward to come back. And not just Sanheim, maybe other players felt like, man, how are they going to bring Sanheim back, knowing that they were trying to trade him? And I think that the one, not a misconception because it's true, but the one talking point has been, well, John Tortorella doesn't like him. John Tortorella wanted him moved on from. And I don't think it's necessarily true. I just think it was maybe a bad first impression for Travis Sanheim under John Tortorella. But the one thing that Sanheim does have in his corner, or who he has in his corner rather, is Danny Briere. And I'm led to believe that Danny Briere is a fan of Travis Sanheim, and that maybe last year was just a blip on the radar. And the real Travis Sanheim is more of the guy that we saw in 21-22 when he had a really good season. And let's be honest here, like, contract aside, you can benefit from having top 4 quality defensemen playing alongside kids in your top 4. And Ristolainen's that, and Sanheim's that. And, I was talking to someone the other day, and when you had Ivan Provorov and Shane Gostisbehere and Travis Sanheim come up as younger defensemen back in 2016, 17, those years, Provorov was playing with McDonald. Gostisbehere was playing with Robert Hagg, who was also another young defenseman in his own right, and a bottom pair guy at that, or sometimes a Christian Folin. You had Sanheim playing with Radko Gudas, who's a solid bottom pair guy, but a bottom pair defenseman. And what this one person said is that there's absolutely a benefit to having quality defensemen to play with younger defensemen, especially in top 4 capacities. And let's say Ronnie Attard makes the NHL eventually. Would you rather have him playing with Travis Sanheim or playing with Mark Stahl or Nick Seeler? Would you rather have Cam York playing with Sean Walker, or would you rather have him playing with Rasmus Ristolainen? So yes, would have there been a benefit to moving on from Sanheim, getting out from that contract before the NTC kicks in, maybe getting more of a veteran in Torey Krug to play that mentorship role? I get that, and I do see that how that would have been beneficial. But I don't think hanging on to Travis Sanheim is the worst thing in the world, because you still need veterans on your roster, and not just plug and play veterans like Stahl and Seeler and Walker. You need quality veterans like a Ristolainen and like a Travis Sanheim.
I think that the fact that the Torey Krug didn't waive and that deal didn't go through as was constructed apparently is a good thing. I was not for that. I'm not for a 32-year-old on that contract with Torey Krug. I think that's going to end up being one of those ones that go, thank God that deal didn't go through. Sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make.
The first round pick was the only thing that really was intriguing about that deal.
Yeah, but the first round pick, even, you look at it, when you get beyond the middle of the first round, it's basically, a coin flip, whether that guy's even going to make it 200 games in the NHL.
Yeah.
So I get the notion of first round picks and all of that, and the value that they hold in today's NHL, and they are so valuable because of the lack of escalation of the cap. But when you look at the raw numbers, I mean, when you get to pick 18, it's about a 40% chance that pick 18 through 26 is going to play 200 games in the NHL. It just doesn't. It's not as valuable of a commodity, I don't think, in reality, than that it is. Now you got to draft well. The Flyers have drafted really well in that range, that 22 range, and with Claude Giroux and Simone Gagne and those kind of guys. But we'll see. I think it's good that element of the trade did not happen. Hayes gone, part of that too. But Emil Andre is a guy that I noticed in development camp, and he's a smaller guy, but he is thick. Like, he's got a really strong frame and a strong skater. And they were using him a lot on both sides, on the left and the right. Now, we know that with the SHL, he's got this deal whether if he's not in the NHL, he could have to go back to Sweden. I don't think that would be good for his development at all. I hope that they come to an agreement. And if he doesn't start in the NHL, he can start with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, where he played some last year, because sending him back there does nothing for his development. It's either with the Flyers or the Phantoms. And I think it's likely he starts with the Phantoms and they work that out, but he's a guy that could be on the come as well.
Yeah, and like presumably if he goes down to the Phantoms, he's going to be their top dog. Like, I'm just trying to look at the AHL defenseman that they'll have. Like, Victor Mete is not going to challenge him for that. Yeah, you have Ronnie Attard maybe on the cusp of AHL and NHL. You have Helgi Grans, Ethan Sampson, I believe, is coming over in a professional graduation rather. So to me, Belpedio, I believe, was re-signed as well. So to me, there's no more Zambula. There's no more Wyatt Wiley. Even he probably didn't play a major role. There's no more Cam York. So unless maybe Ronnie Attard starts the year in the AHL, I don't see anyone down there who could kind of surpass Emil Andre as the top dog. And kind of being the number one defenseman on a professional team in North America, I think that will do a lot for his development. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they're trying him on both the left and the right is certainly interesting. Like, I mean, from a long-term perspective, like, obviously you could look at guys like maybe Grans and Sampson and Bonk, but in the immediate future, aside from Ristolainen, I mean, Walker, I don't think is going to block anyone, maybe Attard as well, but I think that there would be a lot more options on the right than the left. But then aside from York, you have Igor Zambula, you have Travis Sanheim. So I think eventually they're going to have to try one of these left shot guys on the right. I thought maybe Igor Zambula would try that. Maybe stylistically it would work for him as more of a defensive defenseman type. But if Andre could learn to play both sides, kind of like what we saw with Cam York last year, would certainly give them a lot more flexibility and certainly more options.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get York to his natural side this year and let him blossom even further. I think that's really important. Jay messages in and says, but Sanheim's going to be that bad 32-year-old contract with 4 years left when this team is in contention. Krug was short-term paying for long-term gain. I know, obviously the stock on Sanheim is down. He had a really not a good year. I was going to say erratic, but he did have some moments where, he looked like Travis Sanheim, getting up in the rush, joining the rush, leading the rush. But overall, not a good year for him. But when you look at that contract, I mean, look at the Severson contract. Look at, it's not when the cap starts rising again, that is not going to be a bad number for what he can provide. I mean, I really think that contract doesn't age as poorly as being, people are saying right now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And, you look at other players in that tier who are signing contracts, defensemen more specifically, like Mackenzie Weegar got that contract, Damon Severson got that contract. Like, this isn't like an egregious contract number for what Travis Sanheim is. The only reason why it made sense to move on from him was because they're rebuilding, and you probably, when you're rebuilding, want as few long-term deals as you can, stomach. And you look at them move on from Kevin Hayes. Aside from Joel Farabee, they don't have a single forward signed beyond 2026. And I just think the Flyers really don't want overcommitments. Oh, yeah, Sean Couturier. I forgot about Sean Couturier. But they don't – I just get the sense that they don't want overly long commitments to anyone on their roster right now, because there are so many things in flux, because you have so many guys – not even in the AHL yet. You have a lot of guys in the AHL who maybe by the end of this season or this time next year will be in the NHL. I think aside from JR Avon and Ethan Sampson, they had no graduations from junior into the AHL. So there's a lot of balls in the air here. And there's a lot of things that can change. So I think for them, moving on from Travis Sanheim was more about long-term flexibility as opposed to what it was, more of like an indictment of the player. Now, you obviously have heard that maybe John Tortorella wasn't his biggest fan. And I think at times you saw that last year about him, playing less, at times a healthy scratch. But I do agree that you look around the NHL for second pair defensemen, which Travis Sanheim is, and $6.25 million is very digestible and very reasonable.
Yeah. I think the other thing, do you think there's still a chance that he could be moved? We've heard that Calgary, where he was scratched, where he played with the Calgary Hitmen, or another team may still be interested. Teams based on what they did or didn't accomplish in free agency now pivot to go, okay, we didn't accomplish this, but we need this, so he's a guy that could still be in play. And would he waive? He's got some control now because the no trade clause is kicked in for the 4 years.
Well, that's the big thing, right? That now you can't just trade him to any team. Now there's going to be restrictions. Now he is a Western Canada boy, played junior hockey in Calgary. Obviously, me and Anthony Sanfilippo reported that they had discussed him with Winnipeg. We had heard that maybe going back 2-3 years, Winnipeg had interest in Ivan Provorov. Would they take a stab at Travis Sanheim now? And certainly they maybe welcome a guy who has a long-term contract because so many guys don't want to play there. And he's a Manitoba boy. Maybe that works out. The hiccup there was that their first round pick was too high. I don't think the Flyers are going to give Travis Sanheim away. You see a lot of people that just say trade him for anything, trade him for a third round pick or what have you. I don't think that's necessarily the good thing, because I do think that having Travis Sanheim here is beneficial. Because I just look at a Ronnie Adder, or if Zamula moves to the right, or eventually a Helgi Grans, whoever, I'd rather have Travis Sanheim here than whoever, like a Stahl or a Sealer, because I've seen it before. I saw Provorov play with McDonald. I saw Gostisbehere play with Christian Folin. I don't want that to happen again. And, the other day I was having a conversation with somebody, and it's weird now that Rasmus Ristolainen was brought in here to play a lower role or a smaller role originally, and now he's probably going to be playing a role beside Cam York as that steady Eddie, which he kind of was last year. Small sample size, but we'll see if he can duplicate that in his second year under Brad Shaw and John Tortorella. And I do think the fact that you have Rasmus Ristolainen to play alongside Cam York this year, which I presume is going to be your top pair, is beneficial. Because imagine if you had Cam York playing beside Travis Sanheim on his offside, or a Sean Walker or a Mark Stahl on his offside. That wouldn't help anybody. But I think Rasmus Ristolainen, maybe not the best option in the world, but not a terrible option. I think having Sanheim on the second pair is beneficial if you have an Adder or Zamula or Helgi Grans eventually come up.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. I mean, the decor is a big question mark and concern for me going into the season. There's a lot of variables here. There really is a lot of variables that give me a little bit of an uneasy feeling. And Tyson Forster, watching him at development camp, he's been there a couple times now. But geez, does he just look ready? You see, when they're doing any drills and with shooting the puck, when he shoots it, it's different. I mean, just every shot, he just bombs it. And he looks like facially, like he kind of lost his baby fat. His fitness he looks more, svelte now than he ever has. And the maturity of his game and his first step is much more explosive than it was when he came in a couple of years ago. To me, this is a guy that, barring a disaster in camp and preseason, he's a lock to make this roster and play a significant role offensively for this team that has a hard time scoring.
And, there's a spot to be taken in that top 9 right now. And I feel like him and Wade Allison are going to be battling head to head before that top 9 role. And it may require one of those guys to play on their off wing. Obviously, we know they're stacked at right wing. And then you also look at returning Cam Atkinson. Is Cam Atkinson a lock to be playing every night? I'm not sure about that. Maybe because of the leadership role and what he can bring off the ice. Obviously, a history with John Tortorella. But even a Ryan Poehling. Like, is it out of the question that Ryan Paling is your 13th forward and Scott Lawton is maybe playing 4C? And that would open up yet another role. So I think that,
That
and a
depends
lot
on
of
Couturier
people,
too, right?
Sean Couturier is the same thing. And that's another thing. Like, we're assuming that everyone's going to be healthy. When has that happened over the last
Don't make that
24
assumption.
months for this team? You have Cam Atkinson, who hasn't played in a year. You have Sean Couturier, who will have gone like 22 months by the time he gets back on the ice for training camp. Like, I think that Tyson Forster will be on this team. And if that means that Wade Allison's your 13th forward, or Ryan Paling's your 13th forward, or whoever, or Cam Atkinson is used sparingly to try and ease him back in the lineup, ditto for Sean Couturier, like, you still typically carry 13 forwards on your roster, or even 14 sometimes. So I think he's going to be on this team. I think that he needs to be playing in the top 9. Like, a lot of people were saying, oh, Garnet Hathaway's going to block him. I wouldn't want Tyson Forster playing fourth line right wing in any way. So I really don't see the point in that, but I understand that people would maybe jump to that conclusion. But look, the spot is there for the taking. You don't have guys who are locked and loaded to play who can't be bumped out. Like, I think Konechny's going to play. Wingers, of course. I'm not going to count centerman, but I think Konechny's going to play. Farabee's going to play. Tippett's going to play. But aside from that, is Atkinson a lock? Is Lawton a lock as a left wing in the top 9? Is Allison a lock? No. For me, I think there's 3 spots that he could easily take right now.
Yeah, I think he's ticketed. And we heard how Torts talked about him last year when he came up. Really liked what he saw, not only with the puck, but away from the puck as well. I put out the quote from Danny Briere about tanking and needing players for guidance. And Chris Amos responded to me and said, the Flyers are collecting players who will never play for them. And so I said, like who? And he said, see the last 2 first rounds. I said, so Gauthier and Michkov will never play for the Flyers, or Oliver Bonk? Explain why they won't play in the NHL. And he said, basically, Cutter apparently is doing all he can to stay away. Cutter would have to pay his own freight, just played in the World Championships, is playing in another tournament coming up. I believe he's taking summer classes, so he can't come to development camp. But let me ask you about this mentality, Ant, of, what are you kind of getting a read on the fan base right now? Because there's a lot of people that are elated over the moon because of Michkov and a rebuild, and there's other people that aren't buying it to rebuild. And, like that guy said in that tweet, these guys aren't even going to play for the Flyers. Bullshit. Cutter Gauthier is going to play for the Flyers this year after his college season. Michkov's going to come over, and he's going to play. He's a motivated guy to come over here and play in the NHL. They did a lot of vetting on him. So what's your sense of where the fan base is right now?
I think I would say that it's cautiously optimistic with a lot of scar tissue. That's what I would think. And I think if you're cautiously optimistic because you've just been burned so many times going back to 2014 by Ron Hextall, I understand. I get it. It's been a tough decade. That's literally what this has been, a tough decade, because essentially since the 2013 lockout, this team has been on a downward spiral. They've peaked a few times along the way, like the first year under Berube in 2014. Then you got 17-18. But for the most part, it has been a terrible, terrible decade. And I understand the scar tissue. I'm someone who usually gives the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise, guilty until or innocent until proven guilty. And I think so far, Danny Briere and Keith Jones have done an admirable job. I don't think that they've hit like a home run and like, oh man, what a perfect offseason. No, there's certainly things that I think could have been better, but there are a hell of a lot of things that could have been worse. And to this point, they've given me no reason to doubt them. And, it's not just Danny Briere, it's not just Keith Jones, it's also Dan Hilferty. And, I've talked about it numerous times, and people like to burn Chuck Fletcher at the stake. And in some instances, it's justified. But I think Dave Scott was a major issue with this team. For this franchise, rather. I think he was a major, major problem. And, the snake rots from the head down. And I mean, maybe that's a bit of a too graphic of an analogy, but I really think that Dave Scott was a major, major issue. I've heard from people still within the organization that they hear the Chuck Fletcher slander and they're just like, Chuck made mistakes, but he was never given the opportunity to do what Dave has given Keith and Danny. And I think that's completely valid. We know now that the senior advisors, not to say that they were puppeteer masters behind the scenes, but we know now that they're playing a lesser role than they ever have before. That was never the case under Chuck Fletcher. So that's why I'm giving such a benefit of the doubt right now, is because it's more than just the general manager that's different. It's more than just the president of hockey ops that's different. It's completely different from the top all the way to the bottom. And I think that so far they deserve the benefit of the doubt. Now, we're just 2 months into this experiment. So a lot can change. It's a small sample size. They haven't been perfect, but they haven't done anything to make me doubt them so far.
Yeah. A lot of people think some of the moves have been egregious. Not treat, the rumor was there was a first and a second offer for Lawton. I don't know that was
inaccurate.
Ever an
it was
actual
inaccurate.
offer. Yeah. I mean, I don't, people kind of look at the rumors sometimes and go, well, they didn't make that deal there. That's idiotic. I don't know that, like you just said, it's inaccurate. You've got a lot of sources. And then, they should have traded Konechny. They should have traded Lawton. They should have traded Sanheim. They didn't trade any of these guys. That's not a rebuild. So, I don't want to tell people how to kind of feel going through this process. I think cautiously optimistic is a good way to put it. Like, you see Briere, it's been impressive what he's been able to do. But ultimately, when the rubber meets the road, it's about results, and that's going to take some time. But I think people also see what's happened in places like Arizona, like what's happened in Buffalo or Ottawa, that have been in perpetual rebuild forever. I got this message from Slim about the rebuild, and he said, that's a fine organizational message that you're not going to tank, but in practice, they need to be figuring out who among their young players is a keeper. And the best way to do that is NHL minutes. And I don't agree that the best way to find out what a guy is initially is NHL minutes. He's got to be ready for the NHL, to me.
And you also, you can disagree with certain moves or non-moves or decisions without saying I have no faith in the team. Look, for me, one instance is that I think that maybe I know for a fact that they turned down a first round pick for Lawton. Beyond that, I'm not sure, but at least one offer included a first round pick. I think it was the Toronto Maple Leafs. I can't say that with 100% certainty. I personally would have done it because I don't know if Scott Lawton's value from an on ice capacity is going to ever get better than it was this year. That's just my opinion. Now, just because they didn't trade Scott Lawton, and I thought they should have, doesn't mean that now I think that they're completely useless and the entire trajectory of the franchise is flawed. I really think that they did a really good job so far. Was it perfect? No, but I think it was pretty good. A pretty good job this offseason. So you can say, yeah, I disagree with this, or maybe I would have done this, or maybe they're going to regret that, without saying oh, they're idiots, they're useless, it's Groundhog Day, same old Flyers. I think that maybe right now, and I think this is where the scar tissue comes in, is where we get the extremes, right? People who are super optimistic and they could do no wrong, and then some people who are on the other side of the spectrum that they could do no right, short of saving world hunger or solving world hunger. So I do think that you could be skeptical of some moves and disagree with some without going so over the top and blaming the world on them.
Yeah. People still are kind of falling into some of the, narratives too. Oh, John Tortorella in year 2, this is when his players, that left tweeter retweeted me, he said his players hate him after 2 years. I mean, geez, you look at it, the guy has had longer tenure than anybody in the NHL that's a head coach, average tenure. I don't think that's the case. There's a lot of turnover too. It's going to be interesting to see how this all kind of gets on the ice when training camp starts in September. But I feel decent about the forward group, Amp, but obviously pending Atkinson and Couturier's health, which is a ginormous question mark. The D scares me. Let's talk about the goaltending. It drafted 2 goalies, Bjarnason and Igor something or other. The Russian kid, they really liked them both. A lot of people saw those draft picks and their immediate reaction was, oh, Carter Hart's getting traded. Those 2 draft picks are long-term 5 to 6 year assets, basically, when
First
it comes to
song was
gold.
drafted in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, that's how, Sandstrom 2015, right?
Yeah.
Not many guys get to the NHL as quickly as Hart did. But you do now have Cal Peterson here, who certainly needs to work on and redevelop his confidence in his game. And then you have Erson, who, played really well here last year in limited time and was a horse for Lehigh. You obviously have Sandstrom, who has to clear through waivers. Who are the two goalies when they break camp? Is it Hart and Erson, and Peterson and Sandstrom have to go through waivers?
I think this is providing Carter Hart is there. Providing Carter Hart is there, I think your two goalies are probably Hart and Sandstrom again. That's my thought on it, because I think Erson will start in the AHL to get that playing time. And I don't think you're going to waive Felix Sandstrom in favor of Cal Peterson, because I think that you risk losing Sandstrom as opposed to Peterson. You could probably pass him through waivers half a dozen times and nobody will claim him, right?
Getting paid $5 million.
Exactly. So Cal Peterson he's been described to me numerous times now as a safety valve. So take that for what it's worth. Now, if Carter Hart isn't here, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he's traded, if you could read between the lines, if Carter Hart isn't here, I think then that's where it maybe gets a bit interesting. I think that it would probably be Sam Erson and Felix Sandstrom, but I could also see it being Cal Peterson and Felix Sandstrom. I don't think they're waiving Felix Sandstrom in any capacity. I think they like the goaltending depth they have right now. I think last year they were kind of over a barrel sometimes because
Grosnick.
What was the
Grosnick
was hurt so often. So I think that they still like Sandstrom in a backup role. Like, I don't think they dislike Felix Sandstrom. And for one more year, him playing the backup role, I don't see an issue with that, especially given the fact that this team isn't looking to win right now. It gives you one more look at a guy who maybe, even if he's just a backup, maybe he takes an Anthony Stolarz type trajectory. I think you've used that comparison a few times. That's still a success. If he could be your in-house Anthony Stolarz, who cares? Your backup for the foreseeable future. So I think Sandstrom is here as the backup one way or another. It just kind of depends what happens with Carter Hart.
Yeah, they do have less back-to-backs this year.
Yeah.
But you still, if you roster two NHL goalies and you got to play them both, you just have to. And you need depth at that position. And I think that may be the thing, because Sandstrom could be claimed very easily because the pay, what he's making is not exorbitant. And teams are always looking for depth goaltending. If they have somebody go down, whatever the situation might be. So what'd you think of Pittsburgh signing Jari? Let's look around the league a little bit, that deal, and what Pittsburgh did so far.
He got 5 years, 5.3. Is that it? I mean, I think for
Dubas' blind spot goaltending.
Yeah, he and then he signed Nedeljkovic as the backup, I think. I think that maybe they looked around the league and they thought that he was the better option. Like, a lot of people had connected Demko to them, and that would have been really good. I think an upgrade. I think Demko's a really good young goaltender. But I think that as far as free agents went, they didn't really see a better option. Like, Brossoit went back to Winnipeg. You had Reimer go to Detroit. Well, I mean, they could have had Matt Murray back. So you wonder what's going to happen there. I think for them, it was just a situation of, is there a better option than Tristan Jarry? I think the contract's a little rich, but I think Jarry's a good goalie when he's healthy. He's another guy that's battled injuries. So I understand why Dubas went back to the well with Tristan Jarry, because maybe the field or what was available in free agency just wasn't worth it to kind of move on there.
When you look at the teams in the Metro, who's the team that kind of jumped the most? Carolina is a very good team, period, end of sentence. They are cup contenders yearly right now.
Yeah.
They get Orlov. Do you think they help themselves enough here?
They're still missing the same thing we've been talking about since they became an upper tier team, and that's a game changer offensively. Yeah. We still don't have.
Very good, but
he's like, and I still think he's a number one center all day long, but they don't have that game breaker. Now, look, you have Vladimir Tarasenko, who's been tied to them since the beginning of free agency. You had Friedge report, I think it was less than an hour ago, that he changed representation. So let's see how that resets the process. You've heard, I expect Tony DeAngelo to be traded back there in the next few days, July 8th or July 9th. That doesn't move the needle in the way of a game breaker offensively. You've heard them tied to Erik Karlsson. Maybe that's the unicorn they need, the game breaker from the back end. But Carolina to me is just treading water here because they still don't have that top tier game breaker offensively that a lot of these teams do, whether that be Jack Eichel or the way Marchessault played. And it just feels that every single year in the playoffs, the Hurricanes run out of steam because they lack that offense.
Yeah, I didn't think that Brind'Amour had a great conference final as the coach. I thought he
Yeah.
was a little too. He wore his emotions too much. He looked too stressed, and when the boss or the captain looks that way, I think that
Yeah.
trickles down. People panic, and I didn't think it was his best performance in that situation. Erik Karlsson has been tied to Pittsburgh. Erik Karlsson's been tied to Carolina, and they're going to have to eat, I guess, roughly 40% of that contract. It's still a huge nut. I mean, maybe he reunites with Brent Burns, but I would be very leery of being a team that acquires him. He had a great year. I mean, I did not think he was capable of even close to that anymore. He had a great year, but are you going to get that again next year?
And it also depends at the ticket. Like you said, 40%. It's that
$8
comes
million.
out that $8 million. So I've heard a lot of people say this. I believe it was Mike Johnson on TSN Radio in Toronto mentioned this. If you could sign Erik Karlsson as 4 years, $8 million per, would you do it? Probably. But then what are you willing to give up to get him for that? I think that's the snag. Is
There's
maybe
a cost
Mike,
per acquisition too. Yeah.
exactly. It's not that you're just signing him in free agency. I think if
No.
you could take a free run at him and just give him the money and commit $8 million for 4 years, it's not the end of the world. The issue is, I think that maybe Mike Greer and the San Jose Sharks believe, like, well, if we're making him $8 million player, we want a king's ransom.
Yep.
I don't know if you could lean on that because there still is that inherent risk of injury with Erik Karlsson.
Yep.
That, you know, he could go 1 year where he looks like the best defenseman where it's not even close, like we saw last year. Or then there's years where he could barely stay healthy. So, I mean, it's a weird situation. It's a sticky situation. I understand that San Jose wants to make the most on the asset and what they get back for him. And obviously another retention on a contract that will last multiple years is a tough pill to swallow. They already are doing that with Brent Burns. But I just think that they maybe have to be realistic as to what the return would look like.
Yeah. The return may not be as good. You're shedding the player.
Yeah,
But that
exactly.
retention for 4 more years. And you're, like you said, you're retaining them, or you can only retain on 3 players at a time. Yeah. So that's going to be a very tough situation. Anybody else around the league jump at you? I saw my boy Alex Lyon signed to Detroit. They signed to Ghost as well.
Detroit's weird. I think they also signed JT Compher 5x5.
Yep.
I'm kind of waiting for Detroit to take that step. I believe this is that's going to be the 5th season that Yzerman is the general manager.
Yeah.
I don't think he's been exceptional at drafting. I think he's had some good picks, specifically Mort Seider, who I believe was his first ever pick as GM of the Detroit Red Wings. I think that they've had some duds. I mean, to this point, obviously Zadina was before Yzerman, but you look at maybe was Lucas Raymond the right pick? Obviously still way too early to tell, but just in the short term, you know, Sebastian Cossa. But I'm just kind of waiting for them to take that major leap. You've heard them tied to Alex DeBrincat going back to the beginning of the offseason. It feels like that's a match made in heaven. Like you said, they bring in Ghost. They bring in JT Compher. They overhaul their goaltending now with Reimer. And I believe a line will be the 3rd guy behind Ville Husso. I'm just kind of waiting for them to take that major step. Like they were kind of flirting with the playoffs at times, but I still just don't know if they have done enough to cement themselves as an everyday playoff team. And, you know, it's 2 off seasons now where Yzerman's fairly active in free agency. Last year, he signed Ben Sherratt. He went out and he traded and then signed for Ville Husso. I believe also there was a forward. David Perron. He brought in David Perron last year. Now this year, we already ran through the signings. I'm just kind of waiting for that time where Detroit takes that step forward. And I just don't know if they've done enough this offseason again to ensure that that will happen.
Last thing, and we'll wrap it up here. Let's rank the 8 teams in the Metropolitan Division based on how you think they're going to finish this year. I mean,
From
Carolina.
best to worst?
Yeah. Well, let's go. Yeah, let's go best to worst. Is Carolina the top team, or is it New Jersey going to be the top team in this division? I think Jack Hughes is going to be a Hart Trophy finalist this year. I think
Yeah.
he's going to have a monster season.
The only thing with New Jersey, again, is the goaltending.
Mhm.
Like, we heard them tied to Hellebuck. The goaltending just scares me. I think they're a really good regular season team. They'll probably finish first or second, kind of like what we saw last year. But if we're ranking towards in cup contention, I wouldn't have them there
So you
just
have
because of that
Carolina as the
goal.
top team in the division.
Probably Carolina, then the New York Rangers because of
Yeah,
the
right.
goaltending.
Yeah. Yeah, you get Shesterkin there, and now you get who's the
Lavi
backup?
behind the bench.
Yeah, well, that's a huge fact. Who's the backup goalie they just signed in New York? Why can't I think of it?
Oh, did they let go of Halak?
Yeah, they signed. Let me see. Why I can't think of it. New York Rangers.
I'll find it. I got it here. Oh, Jonathan Quick.
Yeah, Quick. That's right. An
Yeah,
ancient
so-
Jonathan Quick. Yeah, off another
So
cup.
I like that defense. I like Lavi in there. Like, Lavi's always done well with highly skilled teams, and obviously they
Yeah.
have a lot of highly skilled forwards. A lot of guys with untapped potential like Kako and Lafreniere. And like we've seen with Lavi all the time, we saw it in Philadelphia with Pronger and Timonen. We saw it in Nashville with Subban and Yossi and Ekholm and Ellis. When he has the horses on the back end, specifically in the top four, that makes for a dangerous Lavi team. And you have Fox, you have Lindgren, you have Miller, you have Trouba. I think the Rangers, you could make the case that they'll be more dangerous in cup contention than the Carolina Hurricanes. You get some veteran presence in there with Blake Wheeler. I might lean more with the Rangers than the Carolina Hurricanes, and maybe that's me going back to the well. I picked them to win the cup last year before the season started, but I think the Laviolette edition is very, very underrated.
Yeah, Lavi in year one.
Yeah.
Always pays dividends. He always does. And if Shesterkin is Shesterkin of 2 years ago, not that he was horrible last year, but if he's the Shesterkin of 2 years ago, forget about it. That's stellar goaltending. I got this message from a guy that DMs me quite a bit, Matt, on Twitter, and he said the Flyers should trade TK in a pick. He said, I trade the Panthers first personally too. That will cost that much for Alex Lafreniere. He said, I'd puke seeing TK in that jersey, but Lafreniere is a guy that would make sense for the Flyers and can be a cornerstone of the franchise alongside Michkov and Gauthier. But I told him, I said, the Rangers aren't doing that. They can't.
Yeah.
They're cap strapped.
Yeah.
They cannot take on
5.5.
yeah, they can't do it. And a guy that's going to be due a raise in 2 years, and they're not going to give up on the number one overall pick with a new coach coming in. I mean, part of the reason why Gallant got let go, I think, is for somebody to be the whisperer for Lafreniere and Kako to get them to the next step. Imagine if those two, and they get great lottery luck, and those two haven't really been a part of it to help them. Okay, so I'll give you Rangers at the top, then Carolina, then the Devils. Now you're going into this area, the murky middle. Are you going the fourth team? Are you going Columbus? Are they going to jump up, or is it going to be the Islanders, Pittsburgh, Washington? Fire? I mean, who are you going here with fourth?
I mean, I kind of just want to go with Pittsburgh just because of the Crosby Malkin factor. And now you have a new guy at the helm with Kyle Dubas. But it's Washington doesn't inspire me. I know they added Edmondson. I know they added Pacioretty. It may be weird to say, and I'm probably going to regret this because of the goaltending, but I really like Columbus. I don't know why. I like what they did. Like, Babcock could go either way. It's either going to be really good or really bad. You basically rebuilt your back end with Provorov and Severson. Is Jurček going to make the jump as a top four defenseman right away? You get a healthy Zach Werenski. And then what kind of impact is Adam Fantilli going to have? How much better are guys like Laine and Gaudreau going to be because of Adam Fantilli? A lot depends on the goaltending. A lot depends on Elvis, but I really like their additions on the back end. I like that they're getting healthy. That guy Jurček could be a big-time player as early as this year, and Adam Fantilli could really change their franchise. So, may sound weird, but I think I'm going with the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah, their blue line is stacked, man.
Big time.
It is stacked.
And health is a big thing for them.
Yeah, Werenski, they were so banged up last year. It was disgusting. So, all right, so you got the Columbus Blue Jackets, who finished last year with 59 points, 25 wins on the season. All right, so you got Columbus fourth. You're going to go Pittsburgh, Washington Flyers for fifth.
I'll probably go Pittsburgh just because of the Crosby, the Malkin factor. I really liked, you can never count those guys out. I think they just brought in Ryan Graves from the New Jersey Devils, if I'm not mistaken. Presumably he checks the Brian Dumoulin box.
Yep.
They just traded for Riley Smith, who just won a cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. So I'm just going to go with the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll see if the goaltending can hold up, but Mike Sullivan, arguably the best coach in the NHL. I'm just going to go with the safe pick with Crosby and Malkin, and then I'll probably go Washington right after that. Again, health is a big thing for them as well, but Pacioretty, could he be healthy? Joel Edmondson, a veteran add on the back end as well. So probably Washington is number 6.
And then the Flyers come in at the bottom. Well, with the Islanders, you got the Islanders after that. Lou's handing out contracts and term like it's freaking Pez dispenser.
Yeah, like the Islanders, man. Like you could easily put them. For me, the Islanders and the Penguins and the Capitals are all kind of interchangeable.
Yeah, I agree. Health,
like it's health. It's are guys going to live up to their potential? Like I really like the top 4 for the Islanders. I like their defense in general. Pollock, Pelech, Dobson, Mayfield, Romanov. That's a good defense. It's not exceptional, but it's good. You have one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. You probably have one of the best tandems in the NHL. Yeah, exactly. They just committed how many millions of dollars to Semyon Varlamov over 4 years?
5, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I like that, and Barzal I think is one of the more exciting players in the NHL. Horvat overpaid, but I still think that he's a good second line center for sure. But after that up front, like Andersley, Brock Nelson, JG Pageau, Palmieri, like you're kind of hoping that one of their younger guys takes that step. Who's that young Wallstrom?
Wallstrom.
Yeah, it's just I don't know if they have the offense. And you barely squeak in last year, and I think that was largely on the back of Ilya Sorokin. And you need good defense. You need great goaltending. But in the current day NHL, you need offense, and their offense just scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, it's not. There's not enough depth there. All right, well, let's wrap it up there, Ant. We're getting close to an hour here. There was a lot to discuss. If anything breaks, we'll be back next week, and we'll see where things go, man. Great work on the fourthperiod.com covering all the twists and turns, and there's been a lot of them with this offseason so far, really since Chuck's been fired back right after the trade deadline.
Yeah.
But read Ant's work at thefourthperiod.com. Give him a follow on Twitter at ADeMarco25. And everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Leave us a nice 5-star rating and review. We'd appreciate that as well. And everybody enjoy the hot weather and wear the tank top like Ant. Any final word, Ant?
Enjoy your summer. I might be checked out for a bit unless there's breaking news. Maybe we'll check in here for the odd show here and there. But I think you and I are both looking forward to some time off.
Totally agree. Everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you